Everyone. I'm your host for Tech Field Day, Stephen Foskett. I am here in not sunny, not warm Silicon Valley for Tech Field Day 27. We are wrapping up the event right now. It's been a quick and compact event. We had a lot of content, a lot of presentations. And what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of look back at what we heard, what we thought of the presentations and the companies and everything, and think as well about where we're going next with Tech Field Day and as an industry. As a reminder, Tech Field Day is the original all topics Gestalt event. That's why we called the company Gestalt IT, was because I thought that it would be magical to get together people who have different backgrounds and different areas of technical focus, introduce themselves to each other, have them get to know each other, build connections, build ideas. I feel like crossing the streams is where the excitement happens in IT so many times. And it's the same with the companies. As you saw today, and as you see at every Tech Field Day event, we have companies from all different areas coming together, thinking about different things, presenting different topics. Just now we had Men&Mice present IPAM, DNS, DHCP. We had MemVerge talking about big memory, brought along Astera and Xconn, who are building some of the first CXL products. We had heard from the CXL Consortium. We also heard today from Kentik, who are in a completely different area, debugging the internet. That's what I like to say with Kentik, yeah. Honestly, the companies are bringing in such a wide variety. It really gives us a cross section of the industry. So I want to start with some of the delegates. Maybe we'll start with some of the remote delegates, since y'all have been such an important part of this event overall. What did you think? Let's start off with Men&Mice. What did you?
I'll go. They have a good product, right? Seems to be pretty thorough and pretty thought out. Their issue is, like we talked about earlier, is it's still DDI, which is just a battlefield, I guess. I don't know an appropriate term for it. It's a never-ending battle to keep it organized. But if you can get your organization to buy into it, if you can get your people to actually do what you want them to do, quote unquote, then it would be a fantastic product to use. It's probably better than. Well, I don't know. I won't say better, but I don't really have too much experience with other competitors with it. But it seems to be a proper tool that will do exactly as they describe. So it's going to be worth my time. I'm definitely going to look at them.
I played around with it just after VMware Explore Barcelona, because I was also very excited about it. I had really difficult time in getting it installed because the documentation was not up to par. And when working with it in the interface, there's always something missing. It's somehow, it didn't feel complete.
To be fair, they are a relatively small company in the tech sector. I think that they do have a good handle on the basics and medium level elements, and are breaking into the higher level elements. They have a ways to go, but I thought it was a nice aggregation. There's a lot of functionality level there, replicating Microsoft and Linux DNS servers, etc. They had a lot of useful stuff, that's not natively available. I think there's a lot of potential with it, but yeah, there are areas to focus on.
I like the fact that it was abstraction, and they had this kind of premise of, look, you rip us out, it's still there, you're not going to lose anything. We want you to buy into the software so much that you want to keep it. And I like the fact that they weren't kind of locking people into something because it was all going to fall apart if you did want to remove it in the future. So I think that's quite important, especially when you're overlaying so many different technologies.
Yeah, especially that they are not the DNS server, they are not the DHCP server. They just help you manage a lot of different ones. That's really a plus.
Exactly. There's so many solutions out there at the moment. We don't need more, but helping you bring all those together, I suppose there's real value.
Yeah, I imagine that the right word is what Craig told before, aggregation. I mean, it's maybe better integration, because every DVI management there are so many other products, but everyone do just that function. In that way, in Men&Mice, I found very interesting product, very interesting functionalities. But again, as told by Craig, there's space to be better. I'm sure they will.
I think for smaller houses at the minute, SMB and smaller mid-size, where they don't have these huge dedicated teams around network, and if anybody's currently doing IPAM on a spreadsheet, it's a fantastic solution. It's light years ahead of doing it all manually in Excel.
And for those that haven't even got the Excel spreadsheet and are just trying to deal with the massive growing mess.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, we actually recorded a podcast that's going to come out on March 13th, Tuesday, about this exact subject, about IPAM and spreadsheets and manual versus automatic.
I think one of the things that they should have focused on a little bit more was the use of their APIs. I think that they would have a lot of value, really, if they were in an enterprise type organization and all of the other automation tools that were doing things like deploying VMs or reconfiguring networks or for setting up test beds or whatever, could actually use the APIs to tie into that to get their resources. Because I think really the key thing about the product is it's a centralized resource broker, and rather than just use it as a viewer, it would be really cool to start using it as the way to hand out those resources.
The way it's able to talk to different platforms, I see a great value for an M&A style company, because you acquire another company, now have manage all their mess of DNS and DHCP. This helps you pull it all into one viewpoint. On the flip side, you're still having to manage the patching of the underlying OS and daemons yourself. So it'd be nice if they would bring up some of that functionality into the tool to at least tell you that, hey, the version of bind you're running has 23 new security holes in it. You might want to patch.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that sort of retrospective. I also think one of the fun things about presentations at Tech Field Day is you get to people like Sigfus coming in who really, really knows the area that they're presenting on. We saw that again and again this week. And so I really appreciated that presentation and that sort of deep dive nerding out about these things. So next, we heard from MemVerge. Was this the first time you had heard from, or if this was the first time you had heard about MemVerge, what's your initial impression of Big Memory?
I hadn't heard about this before. I'd actually Googled CXL and came up with some kind of educational system. So I was reading that and I thought, wait, this can't be right. So I was really impressed. I mean, I didn't know anything about this, and it's one of these things that, the world is changing. You're looking over in that direction. It's changing there. So again, it's new. There are a lot of questions about security, but yeah, I mean, if they're already able to do the memory pooling, that in itself, and the thing that I like about it affects every technology, like Kubernetes, like massively, right, and other technologies and VMs because of this memory pooling. It's an area which didn't exist basically. So
I've heard about MemVerge before and about the memory machine and their snapshotting, and we didn't talk about this so much because we focused on CXL, but the combination of doing massive snapshots in memory and then adding CXL with memory pooling, right? This is always like, every time I listen to MemVerge, my brain hurts, which is a good thing. And it just blows you away because they're really cutting edge. And a lot of other vendors we've seen and talked about, they're not the only one. There are other companies in the field who provide a similar value add. I don't know of anyone who does something like this, like MemVerge. So it's always refreshing to see with CXL, what Geoff already mentioned. It's a great technology. My concern is about the security being bolted on after the initial release. And if experience teaches us something, it never ends well. So I'm looking forward to where this goes. I'm looking forward to standard 2.x, shall we say, when there will be more devices out there and we actually can see a CXL switch in the wild.
Well, and composable composable infrastructure has been talked about by different vendors for several years. With the stuff from MemVerge and Astera Labs, it's starting to feel like a real thing, not just a buzzword. And the classical VMware problem is you need more memory. Well, you have to buy more CPUs. With CXL, the reality of being able to just buy a chassis with 16 terabytes of RAM and plugging it in to your existing CPUs is now becoming something tangible.
Of course, that's a little off in the future, but right now you can already buy like the Astera card and put a bunch more memory into the server that you have.
Yeah, I did. I didn't really understand the main purpose or the main thrust of what CXL was after for quite a while, and that became a lot clearer, where you can actually build out your infrastructure to much larger scale and not have to be doing things at the server unit level. So that was actually very useful information for me in seeing this, and you know, both the Astera and Xconn add-on products both seem to add a lot of value. As we had in our roundtable discussion about CXL yesterday, I do think that we're going to see networking type issues when they start actually trying to come up with multi-tier switched connections with CXL, and I'm not sure that will ever go very far.
Short term, the clear beneficiaries here are the hyperscalers, in my opinion. You know, they can afford to add extra RAM to a host. They can analyze the data across hundreds of thousands, if not millions of VMs. Look at the ones that never use CPU but just hammer RAM and load more of them up on a single host. You know, and at a greatly reduced value versus, like you say, wasting additional resources that aren't in use. So short term, expansion cards aren't going to affect SMB or mid-size enterprise, even large enterprise at the minute, unless they're into high performance compute. HPC is a good winner at the minute as well.
Right, and I was going to mention that it's beyond hyperscalers. I think the people who would actually use it would be the people who have to do, you know, data lake type operations, places like biomedical industries, electronic design automation, you know, all sorts of various different deep learning and AI type applications.
That's a good keyword, AI, deep learning and AI, because, you know, we talk about, as in general, we talk about things like ChatGPT and Midjourney, but we don't talk about them in the office. We talk about them out of the office right now. Just in the next year, all that stuff is going to be in office, and people are going to write their form letters, and they're going to create their graphics and their PowerPoints and everything like that, and they're going to need those things. And if they bring that all in house, and something like MemVerge adding to the server will be able to give them the power to do these types of things without having to outsource it too much. So I'm just really wondering how they got the elephant on the surfboard.
Lots of peanuts.
Yeah.
I think it's a highly disruptive technology. I think that what will be interesting over the next 2 years is seeing how broad this market gets. You know, MemVerge and a couple other players are out in front right now. Who else comes into the mix? And does their time to market advantage give them an opportunity to get a foothold in some key customers before some larger players come in?
And another key is just the whole idea that we can't think of CXL 1.0, 1.1, 1.2 as a actual roadmap. It's more of a structure of, do you really need CXL 3.0, or do you fit in the CXL 1.0 realm nice and safely?
I'm thinking also another point that could be how physically can change a data center. I imagine kind of silos with this computing, memory, storage, where the racks are separated, where of course the rack that host memory will be larger than all the other ones. So a kind of, very different than now.
And touching on the MemVerge aspect, the functionality there that isn't common, the machine level, state level snapshot, and like their example of restoring clones of that snapshot and accelerating AI workloads, that's hugely cost beneficial. Hugely cost beneficial. So the two main things is around that machine snapshot capability, but also their memory management and tiering.
Yeah, and I think that that's an important point, Craig, because of course MemVerge doesn't require CXL. Now they're big boosters of CXL and big fans of it, obviously, because hey, it's a technology that gives us tons and tons and tons of memory, and we're a company that uses tons and tons and tons of memory or makes that useful. So I can see why they love it, but of course the product is useful without CXL, without this kind of memory, and even without big memory. I think that's one of the things that came up in the presentation too. As Craig said, the idea of doing memory snapshots. Remember they were talking about bursting on-demand instances and pausing and restarting running workloads. I mean, that stuff is pretty cool. Well, let's move on to talk a little bit. We did, I guess it's kind of the same topic, but we did hear also from CMAC about the CXL Consortium. I think that most of us, or the message that I got was from a lot of people, was that was a really great overview of what CXL sort of is, right? What's your reaction to that part of the presentation?
Yes.
Given our podcast, Stephen, I had already found those slides, and I'd seen most of them before, as part of the research on CXL. I think you've hit the nail on the head. It was a very good overview, and really well suited for people who aren't familiar with CXL. But one of the great takeaways from this presentation was just the scale of this consortium. It's phenomenal. There's 240 companies now that are all agreeing to do something in the exact same way. And whilst, yes, we've had similar levels of functionality with Gen Z and other products, we've never had, it's always been proprietary. It's never been something where multiple companies agreed to do it the same way. And the impact of that, I think, is going to be huge.
Well, I agree. So it was a great primer. And we talked about we probably should have had that before the other presentations, because a lot of us, including me, were not that familiar with CXL, right? Somewhat familiar. One of the takeaways, and I brought that up some, as a customer or consumer in this case, there's different standards. While backward compatibility was great, it didn't really define what the standard can or cannot do. And it always, where I go back is USB standards, right? You have machines that have USB. You have no idea what it can do everything, but unless you plug something in, you really don't know. Can it do DisplayPort on it? What's the speed? Just because it says USB 3.2 doesn't mean it does 20 gigabits. So I see some similarities with CXL there. While it's backwards compatibility, it's great. I wish moving forward, and also for the marketing team, like how do you package it once it becomes more mainstream, once it's outside of the hyperscalers, once the bigger businesses and then the medium-sized businesses come to, okay, we want to use this. What I took away is it will be up to the vendors to clarify what this box I'm buying can actually do. But I do wish it will already be a bit better defined by the consortium. If you get this standard, this is definitely included, right? And to communicate this a bit better.
Well, they've got that, but as I said, the list of required things is like 4 or 5 items, and here's another 30 potential items that are optional. Well, the consumer is going to, average consumer is going to be like, oh, CXL 3.0, it's got all 35 items. Well, they buy the device and find out, oh, it's got the 5 required, then 2 of the optional ones, and the one key feature they were really wanting was optional, and it's not there.
Like encryption, right? Which is, you think you buy encryption, and then I work in the finance. It's, if I tell the government artist, well, our encryption is optional, that is not a good conversation you're going to have.
I don't think it's going to offer any relief from common compatibility matrices that we have now. I think that no matter what, we're going to still end up with the complex compatibility matrices for all the various different products. We can work with this CXL product, we cannot work with this CXL product. And it's going to be one of those things where every person who wants to produce a CXL product is going to have to qualify against whoever is talking to them. And I don't think it changes that aspect of the tech industry at all.
And that's something that Astera Labs is taking on right now, to be that group that is taking MemVerge and the Supermicro server. Do they work together? What compatibility level do they interact? Which is, it's great that someone's taking that up, but that should really be more the consortium rather than a vendor that is making their own product taking that mantle up.
There's a couple of points there around, Nico, you brought it up around what am I getting? You know, I think that there'd be companies who'll do it all and call it out as full CXL spec. There'll be companies who'll do some proprietary. Hopefully the market will regulate itself, and people will, architects especially, will become aware that that may be proprietary. I need to ask, because if that's proprietary, I'm not guaranteed it's going to work with CXL equipment from a different vendor. So, you know, it'll matter. Well, the idea is that if they meet the CXL spec, it should work. But the fact that Astera are doing it with multiple server vendors is very, very good. Is very good. It's like an HCL, you know. Can you put a part in a VMware host that isn't on the HCL? Yes. Will it work? Maybe. You know, if you have a support issue, can you go to them for help? No. I can see it going a similar route.
Yeah, and as Andy said, I mean, this is something that all of us in IT have dealt with quite a lot for a long, long time. And it's not like I bought this thing, you know, this consumer thing on Amazon, and I plugged it in, it didn't do what I expected. I think a lot of us are going to be doing some very careful testing and proof of concept and working with the vendors to make sure it's on the compatibility list and all that sort of thing before we spend huge amounts of money on this stuff.
And one more thing about Astera, there's very few companies at the minute with actual ASIC silicon on the market with products. You know, they've a real good head start here in the CXL.
And how are we going to redo our enterprises for that? I mean, still don't know if a current processor can be rewritten to actually accept CXL, or do you have to completely buy a whole bunch of new boxes?
CXL is going to be determined based on the processor generation.
Yeah. What processor generation is that?
It starts with Sapphire Rapids and Genoa. And moving forward, we'll get to further iterations of CXL with next generation processors.
So shifting gears then, now that we've had a little chance to talk about the CXL presentations, let's talk about today's presentation with Kentik. We heard a bit about them. What's, again, somebody who wasn't familiar with them, what is your impression of Kentik?
I like the flows. I mean, that for someone who's not a network person per se, just to be able to see and the little lines, whatnot, and the one that goes red. I mean, that she I think her name was Rosalind, was right when she said that, you know, these things tend to pop up the worst possible times when your focus capability is not very good, and so you want as many aids as possible, as many helpers you can have, and so a visual graphic, you know, interpretation of your network and showing what's possibly wrong, I can see is very, very helpful.
Someone who is a network person, that is amazing. The number of times where I could have used that and saved hours is staggering. And that result down from here to here, it's a security group, was up in a split second, like a second. You know, I thought the mapping and flow testing in AWS especially was phenomenal.
Stops you from going the wrong path, which has happened when you're troubleshooting and you don't have it simple in front of you, simple and stupid, and you start going to the really difficult thing. It turns out to be something simple. You go, well, it can't be that. It's got to be this.
But it's the aggregation across regions and accounts and
yeah, I think that this is the point. If you have a multi-cloud installation, you can do it without it. I mean, if just talking about your own data center, it's you can do it when you have a multi-cloud installation where you have to see your Azure, your Amazon, your on-premises. I told premises, not premise. And so, so I think this is a very, very great instrument. And for network administrators, it's something that will save them. Just to say, no, it's not my guilt. I'm not guilty in that case.
I think it would have been good to see more of those visualization examples. I think they spent quite a lot of time on what we were discussing were kind of network troubleshooting concepts and the agents at the beginning, and then they then got into the bit where we all went, wow, look at this, look at the visualization of the data and the power of it and the possibility when we start bringing in hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, etc.
I'd love to have asked them if there's any level of multi-tenancy so that CSPs and MSPs could resell it on. I didn't get any of that. I don't know if they have it, but it seems as though right now they're targeted to very large enterprises, so they would have their own dedicated instances, and that would make sense. But it from a network management and troubleshooting tool, you know, if you're in a CSP or an MSP and you've tons of networking people, it's a huge enablement.
Well, it's based on their existing platform, which they do sell to service providers. So I would highly expect them to have taken the multi-tenancy of the existing platform and extended it into the new features. And it's already their base product, so it'd be kind of stupid not to take use of it in how they've extended it.
Yeah, I sort of got the same impression that it was intended to be enterprise or organization wide, not as a separate thing. And I don't think anybody did ask the question about are multiple roles defined. But the other thing that, I mean, just like for Network Insight as a comparison, they didn't necessarily talk about any ability to drill in on the networks, that you weren't able to look and say, this small network here seems to be having some problems. Let's zoom in on it and see what's going on. And, you know, that was, I think if you're actually going to be multi-tenant, that would be one of the things that would be useful. And, you know, the tenants get their own view, or the overall administrator could see the same view if your tenant really isn't paying attention to what's going on.
What I thought was refreshing is he had a slide of what we not do. I mean, that's usually the negative slide, and I appreciate that. I personally think it's going to be a big year for them, because it seems they're like, when we talked after the roundtable afterwards, it's coming very soon, or we're on it. So I hope they can deliver on this, and I think it will make them a much more complete solution in the market.
It was even more impressive that they had a double negative. So they had a negative roadmap, and then they had things crossed off their negative roadmap.
And I really respect that when a company is understands themselves enough to say, we are not this, we are not that, we're doing this thing. And another thing too, all of these presentations reminded me of the power of talking to somebody who really, really understands the space. And so often it's not so much the product as it is the fit for purpose of the product that matters. You know, it's not the intrinsic, cool quality of the software development. It's the fact that this was somebody who had a problem, solved the problem, and is sharing their solution with the world and really gets what they're solving. We certainly saw that with all of the companies here, and I think that is my favorite kind of field day presentation. Just like I said as earlier too, my favorite kind of field day presentation is when we have people from different backgrounds hearing something that they didn't really know about, and then they can bring their own understanding and experience to that discussion. So before we wrap here, I do want to shift gears and ask sort of a going forward question. So again, this is Tech Field Day. All topics, variety of companies. Why would a company want to present to somebody who's never heard of their space? Why would a company who does CXL want to present to somebody who doesn't know anything about CXL or doesn't understand, Kentik space? What's in it for them?
You only talk to people that know your product or your product space, you're going to get the same general answers all the time. You talk to someone that's completely outside of that space, you're going to get a different viewpoint. Their answer is going to potentially give you insights into a way to make your product better or to capture a greater part of the market.
Yeah, it's originality, because you're going to get original answers, not answers you expect. You're also not going to get the, stamped responses that you expect from webinars and whatnot. And probably you can get some really good ideas when you have these kind of smart people around.
I was going to say that it's you probably learn an awful lot about how your product that you are very well familiar with can integrate with other technologies that you might not have even thought of, because you have a bunch of different people who know different technologies, and it's a great way for the companies to learn, okay, maybe I do need to have some networking expertise if I'm doing CXL, because there's some integration there. And I think if you're actually stuck in a very narrow space, you do actually only get the answers you expect.
You don't know what you don't know, and I think that works for both sides of the conversation, for both the vendors and people like me that didn't really know anything about CXL when I joined. It's always good to learn about what you don't know about.
Right. I mean, we actually, in one of our breakout discussions, we had one vendor say, can I actually describe this as an infrastructure product? And it's like, well, you think of this as infrastructure because you're focused on this one piece of the infrastructure. And I think, that probably opened their eyes a little bit. And it's like, your piece of the infrastructure is not the only piece of the infrastructure.
Good point. Yeah.
It's also good for them to see how their messaging is, right? We've had that before. If I don't know anything about your product, can you explain your solution in a really short amount of time and show me what added value you bring to the table? I don't need to understand the technical details, but if you cannot explain what you actually do, what is the benefit for the customer/consumer, then you probably need to tweak a bit on your messaging. It's my 30-second elevator spiel, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult for these early CXL adopters. They're probably engaging with the larger players. They're aware of problems that the huge players are having. They've seen where they can add value, but they want to expand that market. So right now they're planting seeds with mid-size and enterprise, that may not come to fruition for 3 to 5 years.
And I think that this is really the root of what we're trying to do here. So if you're looking at this and you're wondering about Field Day and you're wondering what this is all about, this is what it's all about. It's about a group of people who really care about this stuff, who know their space, who know their technology, who are clever and interested and want to know more and want to share. And I love that aspect of it. And that's what Field Day is all about.